So thank you for all coming tonight to our FH Heart Healthy Diet Talk. My name is Ariel and this is Alicia, and we're two senior dietitians here at PCH that work with the FH team. We've got a pre-session survey that we'd love you to do. So if you can point your phone to the screen, pick up the QR code. It's a really quick survey. So if those that are at home could also do that, please. So I'll just leave this up here for a few moments. It gives us very valuable information about how useful this session is for you.
And if you have any questions while we're talking today as well, we'll do questions at the end. So there's a little Q&A for those of you online. Obviously, those of you here, you can just yell at us, put your hand up. But if you're online, there's a Q&A right next to the chat box on Teams, and you can just post your question in there whenever throughout, and we'll answer them at the end.
Great, okay. So moving on, we'd just like to acknowledge the Aboriginal people of the many traditional lands and language groups of Western Australia, and we acknowledge the wisdom of Aboriginal elders, both past and present, and pay respect to the Aboriginal communities of today. So today we're just going to recap the FH diet relationship. Some of this information will be a repeat of what you've heard in clinic. We're going to cover what is a heart healthy diet and how we can do some practical food swaps. We're going to touch on reading some food labels and some of the tools that you can use to make that easier. Some tips around takeaways and meal plannings for your family, and then plenty of time for questions at the end. So a quick recap on FH. As you know, it's a genetic condition that affects how cholesterol is cleared from the blood. Cholesterol is important for many of our body hormones and for digestion of our food. People with FH have much higher LDL, so low density lipoprotein cholesterol, from birth ongoing, and this increases their risk of having early heart disease and heart attacks and stroke. There are three main types of fat in the blood that we monitor in clinic. The main one is LDL cholesterol, and that is what is particularly high in people with FH. This is nicknamed the bad cholesterol because it blocks the arteries. So down here, I'll see if I can get my cursor here. Here we go. On the screen, LDL cholesterol builds up on the inside of our arteries and can cause inflammation in the arteries. So if we think of it like a hose, it can cause like a partial or even a full blockage in the arteries. And that can affect things like blood pressure, and it can also completely block the flow of blood, which can cause a heart attack if that happens in the heart, or a stroke if it happens in the brain. HDL cholesterol is nicknamed the good cholesterol. That stands for high density lipoprotein, and it's nicknamed the good cholesterol because it actually clears this LDL away from the inside of our arteries, takes it back to the liver for processing, so it helps keep our arteries clear. There's another type of fat that we monitor that's called triglycerides. It's not cholesterol, it's another type of blood fat that we keep an eye on. But the main thing that we focus on FH is mostly our LDL cholesterol. So what's the relationship with cholesterol and diet? You might have heard this before, but you can't diet and exercise your way out of FH, and that's just the reality of the genes that we've been given. But you can keep your LDL down and control it, and therefore your risk of heart disease. And the most important way that you can do that is taking your cholesterol medicine. So for most of you, this will be statins, which reduce our LDLs by about 30 to 50%, so 1/3 to a half. We can support this by having a heart-healthy diet, which is good for the whole family, and that can further reduce our LDLs by another 10 to 15%. Plenty of exercise and play for our kids, and never smoke, and that includes secondhand smoke in families. A heart-healthy diet is also helpful to prevent other long-term conditions such as diabetes or high blood pressure that can also cause heart disease down the track. So fats in our diet and cholesterol. So when we think about the calories or energy in our food, we get it from fat, protein, carbohydrates, and if we're old enough, alcohol. Fat in our diet comes from oils, from plants or seeds, butter, margarine, fats on meat, eggs, and fat that is naturally in dairy. The types of fat we eat can have an effect on the balance of the types of cholesterol in our blood. So I'm going to click, here we go. Okay, so the first type of fat that's in our diet is something called saturated fat. You might have heard of this before if you've been doing a bit of reading online or read some resources. This increases our LDL, the bad cholesterol. It also increases our HDL, the good cholesterol, but not enough to outweigh how much of an increase of the bad cholesterol. So overall studies have shown us that a diet high in saturated fats increases heart disease risk. Our next type of fat that we have in our diets is something called trans fats. It increases the bad LDL plus decreases the good LDL, so that also increases heart disease risk. Sometimes we will nickname saturated fat the bad, and then sometimes we will nickname trans fat the really bad, and you'll see how we control that soon. Getting on to the good stuff are our unsaturated fats. So the first type is called a monounsaturated fat. That reduces the bad LDLs quite a lot, and it doesn't really have too much of an effect on our good HDLs, but it does reduce our heart disease risk. And then we've got polyunsaturated fats, and that includes our omega-3s and omega-6s. You might have heard of that before. They're in fish, and that reduces our bad LDLs, increases our good LDLs, so decreases our heart disease risk. So overall, we're looking for a diet that is low in saturated fats and low in trans fats to keep those types of fat that increase our risk down, and we want to replace them with good fats, which are our two types of unsaturated fats. So, what does this actually look like? What is a heart-healthy diet? I'm sure some of you have heard about many different diet types: the portfolio diet, the DASH, the Nordic, the Mediterranean, the Australian guidelines. There's a few others out there. All these dietary patterns are actually very, very similar and all have very good evidence for preventing heart disease at a population level. The Mediterranean diet has the most studies and the best quality evidence. So practically, what does a heart-healthy eating pattern look like, and what does a Mediterranean-style diet look like? It's low in saturated and trans fats, which were those two types of fats that we can see really impact the bad LDLs, and we want to replace it with the good unsaturated fats. We want to limit red meat, limit highly processed and packaged foods and drinks, and they're foods that are high in fat, salt and sugar. We want to eat more plant foods and whole grains. We want to add plant sterols, and we'll touch on what they are and how much of an effect they have, and cook more at home. So one of the keys around a lot of these dietary patterns is less processed, more home-cooked foods, which naturally will reduce our saturated and trans fats that come in packaged foods. So we will send these, we can share these slides. We can get the nurses to share these slides with all of you afterwards. There's two really good links here. So the Heart Foundation, this first Heart Foundation link is a great summary on fats, oils and heart health. And if anyone's wanting to do further reading and looking into the evidence reviews of studies, there's a wonderful nutrition position statement on heart-healthy eating. So that's been summarised by the Heart Foundation and covers all different subjects and aspects of our diet. So if you're keen to do some more reading, that's a great first place to start. So I want to really impress that a heart-healthy diet eating pattern is not a very, very low-fat diet. The best evidence we have is replacing the saturated and trans fats with unsaturated fats, not replacing it with carbs or protein. The best evidence we've got is replace it with those better types of fats. So what about cholesterol in diet? So cholesterol is made by a liver, so it only occurs in animal products. So humans, we make cholesterol ourselves, and all other animals make cholesterol. Plant products are naturally cholesterol-free, so you'll often see a lot of products that might be avocado products or plant products, and will say cholesterol-free, but it never had any cholesterol to start off with because plants don't have livers. Cholesterol in our diet does not actually have a huge effect on our blood cholesterol. Cholesterol in our diet is highest in fatty meats, organ meats, so things like liver pate or kidneys, if you're into your steak and kidney pies, eggs and shellfish. For people with raised LDL levels, including people with FH, a moderate amount of eggs has been shown to be safe, so about 1 a day or 6 or 7 a week. And we know that saturated and trans fats actually affect our cholesterol much more than the cholesterol we eat in our diet. So really focusing on reducing this rather than the cholesterol in food. So as long as you're not eating a huge amount of organ meats or a huge amount of eggs, you don't really need to consider the cholesterol in the diet too much. Okay.
Alrighty. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about the how we can do these things. So that's a lot of the what a heart healthy diet is. And so now I'm going to try and make it really practical and think about how we can actually implement this at home. So as Ari drove home really nicely, the cornerstone of managing your LDL cholesterol really is eating less saturated and trans fats. And we know that saturated fats are found in our animal products, our meat, dairy, butter, eggs, lard, ghee, all of those foods that come from animals. Those foods also provide a lot of nutrients in our diet too. So we'll chat a little bit about the best ways to include those foods in our diet. And then I also found in a couple of plant sources actually the saturated fats, coconut oil and palm oil are the big ones there to limit. And then we have our trans fats. So we find that they are naturally in small amounts in our animal products, but often produced in the actual food process of turning a liquid oil into a hardened fat. So through that manufacturing process, trans fats are produced. So that's the shortening and frying oil that is used in baked goods and fried takeaway foods, processed foods like that. There is almost no trans fats in the margarines that we're buying in the supermarket. So this is very strongly controlled in Australia, and we have very small amounts, and you can see that on the back of pack labelling that we'll talk about a little bit later. But this sort of gave margarine a bit of a bad rap in its early days, but this process of creating a solid fat from a liquid vegetable has been refined a lot since it was sort of first came about in the 20th century and is now a lot safer. And the margarines at home, very safe. It's more thinking about those commercially baked products that are using this shortening that has a very long shelf life and is a little bit cheaper to use in commercial cooking. So the foods to limit, and I'll try not to talk about this too much and talk more about what we can eat instead, but really the things we want to think about limiting and having rarely in our diet are our butters, coconut oils, processed foods, our fried foods, takeaways, deli meats, meats with a large amount of fat, so very fatty sausages or meats, and then our sort of discretionary or junk foods, our cakes, biscuits, chocolates, crisps, ice creams, pastries and pies. And no, that doesn't mean we can never eat these foods. Enjoy them when we eat them and eat them in smaller amounts. And we'll have a little bit of a look about what we can eat instead. So like Ari said, we don't want to cut out all fats from our diet. We actually want to replace these saturated and trans fats with unsaturated fats. And this is especially important for growing bodies and kids who do have high energy requirements for growth, and fats provide a really good amount of that energy. So using a lovely plant-based oil like our extra virgin olive oils or other oils that are very high in mono and polyunsaturated fats, those good fats. So your canola oils, avocado oil, peanut oil, whatever you prefer to use at home. Eating lots of nuts and seeds, spreads if you're into your peanut butter or your almonds. Avocado is a classic one for your healthy fats, and your fatty fish, salmon, tuna, if you like those foods as well. So important to include these foods in our diet as much as we can, instead of the saturated and trans fats on the other slide. So looking a little bit more at meat. So meat, we talked about animal products and meat containing our saturated and trans fats, but meat also provides really important nutrients like protein, iron, zinc, vitamin B12, and you can absolutely go without eating meat if that's your choice, but you definitely don't have to cut it out altogether. Choosing lean meats is a good way to go. So sometimes that is less of our red meat and more of our lean options like our chicken breast or turkey or fish. Eggs is a good one too, a nice one that's high in protein. Not that it's actually meat, but anyway. Less of the processed meats, sausages, salami, pies, sausage rolls, that sort of stuff. Or when you are buying meat, trimming off any visible fat off the side of your steak or on your chicken, choosing a skinless option or cutting the skin off, and avoiding your deep fried meats, so choosing a grilled option if you're, going out to eat a burger or something like that. And Ari will talk to this a little bit later on as well. So I thought I'd do a few compare the pairs. So when you're looking at beef mince at the shops, this is a classic. This is taken from Woolies. If you shop at Woolies, you may have seen these packets before. So comparing our regular beef mince, that's the one that has 18% fat and 82% meat, to our lean beef mince, that's got 10% fat, and our extra lean or Heart Smart extra lean beef mince. I guess it's sort of in the name there, isn't it? But you can see here when we compare the amount of saturated fat in each of these packets, there's quite a significant difference, and that makes sense. The more fat, the more saturated fat. But a simple swap to something that's going to be, between the regular beef mince and the extra lean, you're seeing quite a significant reduction there, 45 grams per pack to just 11 grams per pack. So it's almost halving each time we go down the line there. So unfortunately the cost does go up a little bit as we're buying these extra lean options, but if you think about this, you're getting more meat in each pack, so it kind of makes sense as well. And what my preferred option is, in fact, to get a little bit more bang for your buck, is swap out half your meat altogether and replace it with some legumes. You're getting a few fun faces in the audience. If you're not into your lentils, you could use your chickpeas or anything else, even though swapping out for 2 extra lean meats would be a great option here. But you can significantly reduce your fat from 90 grams of fat in that total recipe to just 11 grams for a little bit cheaper too. And some bonus added fibre. What about chicken? So you can buy chicken in about 100 ways at the supermarket: cooked, diced, thighs, breast, chopped up, tenderloins, wings, whole. And there will be a big difference in price between the way you're buying it. Usually the less prepared chicken is a little bit cheaper when you're buying it not all cut up and ready to go, but sometimes that's really convenient too. But with chicken really, and lots of white meats, the cuts do tend to be quite important. So opting for something like a chicken breast over a chicken thigh, you can see quite significantly reduces the fat here if we compare the two options with the skin off. Goes from 2.5 grams of saturated fat per 100 just down to 0.5 grams, or 8.4 total grams of fat to 1.6. So quite a significant reduction there. And then when you're trimming your skin off of your meat, so when we're comparing the skin on chicken thighs to the skin off, again, quite a significant reduction in the fat there. So a lot of the fat's hanging around on the skin, and a nice way to cut out some fat when still getting your protein. Dairy foods is another example of a food that contains some saturated fats, but is also really nutritious, really healthy, really important for growing strong bones for kids, giving us essential nutrients like calcium and B12 and minerals like phosphorus and potassium that are really important. So switching to low-fat dairy foods is an easy way to continue to enjoy these foods every day without the additional saturated fats. With the exception of toddlers who are under 2 years old, as they are growing very quickly and often need that extra fat that we get from full-fat dairy. So for kids under 2, we recommend buying the regular fat, and then if the rest of the family has low-fat dairy, you can transition them to once they're older than 2 years old. And really the most important one here when you're switching to low-fat dairy is our really concentrated fat foods like our creams and our sour creams and those really concentrated fat sources compared to our milks, yogurts and cheeses that tend to be lower fat naturally, even if you're buying the full fat options. But simply buying a light sour cream versus a regular sour cream, and I'll show you an example in a second, is a nice way to significantly reduce the fat without having a huge change in taste. You can even get a bit creative, and I like to swap out thickened cream for like a carnation, which is an evaporated milk, or things like ricotta or cottage cheese that are naturally lower in fat. So you can get a little bit creative with replacing cream in recipes too. Looking at yogurt, this is another little example of how the fat content can differ quite greatly within these products. So comparing a coconut yogurt first to our dairy options, and I mentioned at the very start that coconut oil is an example of one of those plant foods that's quite high in saturated fat. So the saturated fat is making up majority of the fat in a coconut yogurt, coconut cream, coconut milk. So opting for a dairy option is more ideal if there's no sort of reason that you need to have a coconut yogurt, you don't have allergies or a huge taste preference. And then comparing two different yogurts off the shelf. Now this Yoplait yogurt isn't necessarily marketed as being low fat, but if you compare the fat content, it's quite a lot less than the Gippsland yogurt, which to be fair is quite delicious, but probably thinking about it as more of a dessert or a treat food. It is quite expensive too. And looking at this slide as well, I think really highlights how sometimes you can't tell just by looking at the front of a pack what the difference is in the saturated fat or in the health. It's not always marketed as light or low fat or high protein. So a little bit later, Ari will go through some label reading tips and we can learn a little bit more about that. And sour cream, this is probably my favourite example, but you can really significantly reduce your fat intake from sour cream just by buying the light option. Tastes really good and you're cutting your fat in half straight away, your saturated fat and your total fat here. I don't think there's a big difference in cost either, but definitely a worthwhile one. Or again, my personal preference, we'll see if you turn your nose up at this, is using a full-fat Greek yogurt instead of sour cream. And again, that's reducing your fat and your saturated fat intake there. Even if you, once your taste buds adjust, you could go to a light yogurt and make it even lower fat. But truly, most people won't notice a difference, and you're getting a bit more bang for your buck with protein and calcium too. All right, we'll talk a little bit about plant sterols or plant stanols now. So what are they and how do they work? Again, you guys might already know a little bit about this or a lot. But plant sterols are molecules that bind excess cholesterol in our gut, which then blocks the absorption of cholesterol into our bloodstream and therefore reducing our LDL cholesterol levels. And Ari talked to cholesterol a little bit earlier, and the cholesterol we're talking about here is that natural cholesterol that is in our digestive tract because our body produces it. Again, really important for lots of our bodily functions, but we don't need it in excess. So these plant sterols can do a good job of blocking that excess absorption and reducing our cholesterol. And plant sterols do occur naturally in the food we eat, in plant foods, so that's our fruits, vegetables and whole grains, but in very small amounts. So to have a significant effect on blood cholesterol levels, you really need to eat foods that have added or fortified with plant sterols. Again, this isn't recommended for children under 2 or women who are pregnant or breastfeeding, just because we don't have that evidence. So not in that group unless you're being, have some really good medical oversight. So in Australia, plant sterols can be added to milks, margarines and breakfast cereals. They also come in a supplement form if that's your preference, but we always recommend in an ideal world getting as much of your nutrition and plant sterols from food rather than supplements. And therapeutic levels, so those levels of plant sterols that have shown a significant effect on LDL cholesterol, is having about 2 to 3 grams a day. And this is shown to have up to a 10 to 12% reduction in our blood cholesterol levels. So what does this look like? So 2 grams of the plant sterols is about a tablespoon of margarine that's got your plant sterols added, so your Proactives or your home brand. It's usually quite clearly plastered somewhere on the front saying cholesterol lowering or heart health. 2 Weet Bix, 2.5 cups of milk, or 4 of those, this particular brand of supplement. Again, if you're using a supplement, making sure you're following the back of the pack nicely and making sure you're buying it from a reputable brand. Often these foods can be a little bit more expensive than the regular milk or the regular margarine. So buying home brands where you can be a little bit cheaper. I think when we had a quick look, the Coles brand compared to Flora Proactive was quite significantly cheaper. They have literally just added the plant sterols in. So if you look at the ingredients list, it'll be the exact same, but they've got the extra plant sterols added in. Yeah, I don't know what the price difference is there, but again, what we would usually recommend to keep the cost down is either just reserving this for the family members with FH, buying the home brands, or I guess being aware that there is no benefit of exceeding 3 grams a day. So if you're already having Wheat Bix and milk for brekkie, you may not need to then buy the butter as well, if that's how you choose to get the plant sterols in. I'll skim over the next few slides in the interest of time, and it is a quite simple message to eat more plant foods, but I just want to stress how important it is as well. I talk about the really good ways, I guess, to eat our foods like our meat, dairy, and those foods that are a little bit more naturally high in saturated fat, but our plant foods really are the ones that come up in all those dietary patterns as being really beneficial for heart health and are a common thread in all of our heart healthy diet patterns. So these are our fruits, vegetables, legumes, whole grains, nuts and seeds. And you'll see, even in our Australian Guide to Healthy Eating, they're making up more than 3/4 really of what we should be eating. And these foods are really important because they contain fibre, or they give us our fibre, which we don't get from our other foods, and that's soluble fibre and insoluble fibre. Soluble fibre is really important in the context of FH, as well as it has similar properties to our plant sterols in that it can help bind excess cholesterol in the gut. And they have other heart protective factors as well that we probably all know a little bit about: vitamins, minerals, flavonoids, antioxidants, and all these naturally occurring products that have a really good role in heart health and overall health as well. So I'll spend another couple of minutes talking about veggies because they tend to be a little bit harder for us to include than fruit and some of the others. It's probably something that most people and families can do better on, and that's myself included there. So some quick tips on how you can get more veggies in: doing a bit of a meat-free Monday, or having one night a week where you don't have meat with your dinner. And as a family, this can be a nice way, I guess, to reframe how we think about our meals and how veggies can actually be the hero of the dish rather than just a side dish. Good one for winter too, with your vegetable soups or minestrones or curries. Another good rule of thumb is trying to serve half of your plate as veggies. So this resource here by Baker's is a good one and talks about how to create a healthy plate. So when we send you the slides, if you want to do some more reading there, you can do a scan of that QR code. But trying to make up veggies half of your plate, or if you're making a mixed dish, half of the meat you're adding into the curry or something like that. A good example, like we talked about earlier with the mince, adding 500 grams of beef mince and then 500 grams of lentils. And trying to get a few different colours into if you're making your fajitas, going for a red capsicum, yellow capsicum and green capsicum's a classic. The different coloured fruits and vegetables tend to have similar nutrients, so it's a nice way, if we can eat the rainbow, to make sure we're covering all of our bases there. Another way to eat on a budget, because as we know, food in the supermarket just keeps going up in price. So eating frozen or canned fruits and veggies has absolutely no compromise on health. They're just as nutritious as the fruits and veggies we get in the fresh section, and they tend to be cheaper, longer lasting, and they can actually be really convenient too in the pantry when you need them. You can get some sort of ready to eat legumes and things as well at the moment. They tend to be a little bit more pricey, but a really nice snack for the school lunchbox or when you're on the go. And you can always have them sitting in the freezer for when you're ready to make your next stir fry or curry at home. Beans on toast is another classic. And finally, our legumes, nuts and seeds. Again, I've just listed heaps of examples on the slides of ways to get these into your diet. adding in beans instead of mince, peanut butter on toast, some crackers dipped in hummus is another good one for the school lunchbox. Adding some cashews or peanuts to a stir fry if you don't like to eat nuts on their own as a snack. Oh, almost stole your slide there, Ari. And psyllium husk is another little sort of supplement food, but it's really a powerhouse when it comes to soluble fibre. So a nice one you can add into your cereals or a smoothie to get a bit extra fibre in your diet if that's something that you're working on. All right, I'll hand over to Ari to go through the nutrition information panel.
Okay, so I'm sure you can all agree that food packaging is an absolute minefield and confusing. At the end of the day, food companies want to sell their products to you. So we dietitians always like to go back to the nutrition information panel as a source of truth and cut through all the food advertising. Every single packaged food in Australia has to have a nutrition information panel by law, and they have to have some key nutrients on there, so things like energy, protein, fat, saturated fat, carbs, sugar, and sodium. Some of the nutrition information panels have a lot of extra things added onto them that can be quite confusing. So we're going to just clarify what's the main things to focus on here. So on every nutrition information panel, you'll have a per serving and a per 100 grams. So the serve size is determined by the manufacturer or the food company and might not reflect how much you or your kids are planning to eat of that. So the classic one is a can of Coke might say there's 2 or 3 serves in there, but most of us will eat that in or drink that in one go. There is always a 100 grams or 100 mils column, and that is really useful to compare products to each other because you're comparing like for like, even if the serve sizes are different. When we compare products, it makes most sense to compare similar products. So we might be comparing popcorn and chips, 2 savoury crunchy snacks, not necessarily popcorn and yogurt. Okay, so the main things that we would focus on for FH and to reduce our LDLs is fat. So saturated fat, we're aiming for less than 3 grams per 100 grams and trans fats less than 0.1. But as Alicia mentioned, that trans fats are very minimal in the Australian food supply, and we're really world leaders in this. It's a very different situation in the US and Canada. So if some of the nutrition information that you're reading online is from there and saying these foods are really high in trans fats, just check where that information's coming from, because the food supply and the food regulation laws are quite different. Sugar, aiming for less than 15 grams per 100 grams. That's good for general health. Sodium or salt, aiming for less than 400 milligrams per 100 grams. Our really salty snacks are probably going to be close to that or above, which is not surprising, they're salty. And our dietary fibre is a goodie, so we want to aim more than 3 grams per serve. So that's the only one that we don't really do per 100 grams, we go per serve. Okay, so we don't expect you to remember this. So we've got some cards here, so those in person here, please grab a card, pop it in your wallet. You could take a picture of this screen or the QR code and take a screenshot of this online. And we've also passed on copies of this wallet card to the nurses, so each time you come into clinic, if you haven't already got one, you can grab one from them. So Live Lighter, which is a program that's run by Cancer Council Australia, has summarised this nicely in a little wallet card, and all the recommendations that we touched on is pretty much summarised in the red column here. So if these foods are fairly rare in our diet, we're doing really well. Of course, you'll always find savoury foods or some of those fattier foods will be in the orange sometimes, and then if we can find a version of that food or snack that is in the green column, then that's the best way to go. So we wanted to give you an example of 2 common types of crackers that a lot of our kids eat. So the first one is the classic Ritz, and If we have a look at the fat, so we're looking per 100 grams here on both products, we can see that the Ritz per 100 grams have 25 grams of fat. So they're 1/4 fat and almost 8 grams of saturated fat. If we go to the peckish plain rice crackers, they're 7 grams of fat and 1.8 grams of saturated fat. So a lot less there. So if your kid's accepting of this, this is a better option to have most of the time. They're savoury foods, so we expect there's going to be some sodium or salt in there. And you can see that the Ritz are pretty high, they're nearly 600. And remember on the wallet card, we were aiming for less than 400, whereas the peckish are 340. They look like big numbers, so that's why it's always good to refer back to that wallet card. Yeah, and unless you're excellent with numbers, we wouldn't expect you to remember that off the top of your head. So if you've taken a picture, I recommend you save it to your favourites folder so you've always got it handy when you're at the shops. It can always be overwhelming reading food labels in the shops, and sometimes we have limited time while we're doing the shopping, especially if we have our kids in tow. So one of the practical ways we like to do this is recommend that families just do 1 or 2 products every time they shop and slowly start changing their pantry over. So if you're like, I'm due to buy crackers, let's have a look at crackers on a day that you've got a spare 5 or 10 minutes to spend in the shops, and find a version that fits for your family's taste preferences as well. And that might be different for our kids with FH if we've got wildly different taste preferences between different family members as well. But slowly over time, you'll find those better options, and then you'll just know next time, I've already checked for that. I know I buy that type of cracker, for as long as they're still accepting that option. The next week you might look at yogurt. The next week you might look at creams. The next week you might look at lunchbox snacks like muesli bars or chips. Okay, so some tips for meal preparation. So when we talk about cooking methods, we recommend trying to grill, air fry, roast or stir fry foods where we're using small amounts of oil rather than deep frying foods. That helps make sure we're not having excess amounts of fat, and also especially those saturated fats. Try to include vegetables and legumes at most lunches and dinners. I know it's very difficult to do this at everyone, but it doesn't have to be fancy. Simple can be quick. We might just add some tomato to a toasted sandwich, or if our kids are happy to have some lettuce to a wrap. Baked beans on toast is an easy one. We could make our own wraps for dinner. We could have a homemade pizza night where we're using chicken instead of those processed meats. Can we put some veggies in? Do your kids eat like maybe a bit of onion or a bit of tomato or a bit of mushrooms or capsicum on their pizzas? And can we use some low-fat cheese? If not, that's okay. But just working within that, anything that you make at home when it comes to like pizzas and burgers, if you're avoiding those processed meats, they're probably going to be a lot lower in saturated fat than your Domino's options and that anyway. So keeping it simple, dinner might be eggs and baked beans on toast sometimes, or toasted sandwiches and some veggie sticks on the side, and that's completely fine. It doesn't have to be fancy. Picky plates or picky lunch boxes are usually pretty popular with the younger kids. Those bento lunch boxes are getting more and more popular these days. So that's a good option that you can cut up a few different options, fruit, veggies, or a little snack pot of dip, so something like maybe a tzatziki or a hummus if they'll accept that, or a guacamole, crackers and some low-fat cheese or a small portion of cheese. And we use things like leftover pasta or leftover roast veggies. Some of our kids will accept that if they've got something to dip it in. Little pots of baked beans or some of those chickpeas that Alicia was talking about before. Or even things like homemade baked goods are always going to be better for you than those packets of chopped chip cookies or mini muffins and cakes that you're buying at the shops, because they're the ones that are going to be higher in those saturated and those trans fats because they're using those commercial vegetable shortenings. You can find plenty of recipes online for things like banana muffins or brownies where they might use oil instead of butter, and the freezer's your friend, chopping them up in advance into individual portions, wrapping them up, popping them in the freezer. You can pop them straight into the lunchbox frozen, and by morning tea, they're usually defrosted. There's another QR code here for convenience meals as well. Takeaways and eating out. So eating out and having takeaways is an enjoyable part of life. We are not unreasonable. Us as dietitians don't live off vegetables and salad. We do have takeout and eat some of these foods as well. If you eat out regularly, it's probably more important to try and choose healthier options because it's what you do most of the time that matters. So where you can, selecting options that contain vegetables, and you're seeing a theme here, we're repeating ourselves with a lot of the themes, but that can be things like stir fries at Asian restaurants, Mexican, Greek, getting a doner kebab, tomato-based pastas rather than creamy pastas. Can we have some curries with some lentils or chickpeas added in, or even things like having rice paper rolls instead of deep fried spring rolls can be a good swap. Can we share a main meal between two people and add some veggies or a salad on the side? Can we try and choose raw, grilled or steamed options of meat instead of deep fried, crumbed, battered options or meat that's wrapped in pastry? Can we order a small or snack-sized side of chips to share rather than chips being the only side with a meat? Trying to limit some options with cream, butter, coconut or cheese in the sauces or soups and go for more of those tomato-based options or sauces that are more vinaigrette. Can we share a dessert? Or after we've eaten out, can we go for a walk and go buy a pack of icy poles or go to a gelato shop and get some gelato rather than cake and ice cream? So that's really going to reduce your saturated fat there. Quite often the kids are quite keen to buy a pack of ice poles if they get to take turns and choose which ones too. So to go on eating out, I just wanted to do another compare the pair. So if we have our classic fish and chips, and I just picked 100 grams of each, so we could compare on an even playing field here. That typically has 28 grams of fat and 8 grams of saturated fat and a lot of sodium, 750 milligrams. If we just ask for grilled fish, have half the amount of chips and then put a salad on the side. So if you're going out to eat fish and chips, you could bring a salad from either home or from Coles or Woolies, or some fish and chip shops will sell a salad. It's usually a lot more expensive than if you grabbed one from Coles and Woolies on the way. But if we halved the chips, then that suddenly pretty much halves the fat, but it almost quarters the saturated fat, but you're still having some fish and chips. And it really reduces the sodium as well. Another classic is the Whopper. That's got nearly 40 grams of fat in it, and this is the version without cheese or bacon added. 12 grams of saturated fat nearly, and well over 800 milligrams of salt. So if your family's happy to go to grilled rather than HJs, a grilled chicken burger will have less than half of that total fat and only just over 2 grams of saturated fat, so a lot less, and about 500 milligrams of sodium. I will say though, in my life, and I kind of like Whoppers, I've never seen a Whopper that looks like this. It kind of more looks like this, doesn't it? So even though it looks like it's got a lot of lettuce and tomato, it doesn't really. All right. So our take-home messages are that a heart-healthy diet can help reduce LDL cholesterol and support our overall FH management. We want to focus on eating less saturated fats and trans fats. Try and eat more plant foods. Any improvements that you can make will help make a difference. And consistency is key. It's what you do most of the time that matters. The once-off bit of chocolate doesn't matter, or a bit of chips doesn't matter. It's what's going into the lunchbox most days. It's what you're choosing for your weekly takeouts most weeks that matters. So here's some more resources. Obviously, Heart Foundation, Baker Heart and Diabetes Institute. If you want to see a dietitian in the community, there's a list of dietitians on Dietitians Australia, Live Lighter. You'll pretty much find that between the first 3 resources, our 3 main organisations that give nutrition advice around chronic disease and cardiovascular disease, that the messages are consistent because they're based on our evidence from research. So we'd like to say thank you so much for listening and giving us your time, and we'd like to have some questions now. And while we're having questions, could I please ask everybody to do the post-session survey and evaluation? This gives us really good information about how useful this session is, if it's been helpful, feel free in the comments to put any other information about what you'd like to hear more on. It gives us really good data about how we can improve the services for our families. And we can start asking questions. So if anyone's at home, you can use that question and answers box. And we've got the nurses monitoring that for us. And then if you're here in person, you can pop your hand up, and we'll probably repeat some of the questions back on the microphone so everyone can hear what the question was and what the answer. Okay. Great. We've got a first question. Okay, so we've got a first question in person here.
Testing, yep. Alrighty.
Yeah, sorry, there's like the stars rating.
Yep.
So what do we do about that?
Yeah.
Such a good question.
Yeah, such a good question. Okay, so we've had a question about the Healthy Stars rating that is on the front of food packets. So currently in Australia, it's voluntary, it's not mandatory. So food companies can choose whether to put it on their packets or not. You'll probably find that healthier options are keen to put it on there because they're more likely to sell products, and less healthy options might not be so keen to put it on there or put their own version on there. Our star rating is based on a balance of different nutrients in the food. So you get points, or you get star ratings for things like fibre and protein, and you kind of lose some star ratings for things like saturated fat and extra salt in there. So it's often based per serve. It can be a really quick tool when you're just looking at the front of packs. It is accurate. Usually if something is like 4 to 5 stars or 4.5 stars, it's probably going to be a lot less in saturated fat and sodium and a lot higher in fibre. But it doesn't mean anything about how processed that food is either. You also lose stars for sugar as well, added sugars. So it can be a quick tool to screen food, and then you can decide as individuals making choices for your family about whether it fits in or not. Some food companies do some little sneaky things. So something like Nutrigrain, which is quite a processed sugary cereal, I think it's got 4 or 4.5 stars at the moment now. It's because they've added in a bunch of extra added fibre to it to push that up as well. So it can be a quick screening tool, but the nutrition information panel is always your source of truth, and with those wallet cards, that's going to give you the best decision-making tool, really.
I think the cereals also can include the milk served with the cereal for the health star rating. So they usually use all the benefits of milk rather than the actual cereal, for example. So that's a little bit sneaky too.
Yeah, so it's based on suggested serve size and suggested serve method. So,
and most of the, I guess, the healthiest options, we have to remember as well, don't often come in a pack. So our nutrition information panels and health star ratings, you won't find them on our fresh fruits, vegetables and all those foods, our meats that are actually quite healthy as well.
Any more questions in person here? No. Have we had any questions from home? Online? No? Don't be shy. Feel free to ask anything. I know there's a lot of information out there about cholesterol and general health. There's lots of like popular diets and stuff, and we've heard most of it before, so please, like, no silly questions like, oh, we were just too good. And I will say we only went 3 minutes over time for what we were told we were allowed.
If you think of a question later, you can always send it through to the FH email, and we're always happy to answer questions. If you see something at the shops or read something online about food and diet and you're not sure, flick it through, and Gemma and Sheree can pass it on to us, and we can always answer it that way too.
Okay.
the question was, do we have a list of all the good things to buy? And we don't. And I think that's because everyone's taste preferences and food preferences are different. So I think work with what you already eat and then use little tools like the wallet guide and the information you've heard today to make small changes. And you don't have to go and find a list of all these foods are the healthiest foods and buy them. It's, you know, what do I eat now and can I choose a slightly healthier option? Because we want you to still enjoy the food you eat and eat the food that, suits you and your family. But I will say the Heart Foundation resources and the Live Lighter resources, they have really good recipes and ebooks and all of that stuff online. So if you follow the links there, you can find some really good suggestions of recipes, and they often link products and things like that into.
On the Baker Idia website, they've got a section called Fact Sheets that you can go to. So the Baker Research Institute, they have really excellent handouts that summarise like fats and cholesterol, and then summarise like how to make healthy meals. I know a while ago they did have a shopping list that focused on low saturated fat, low sugar, high in whole grains. So you might be able to find if they've still got that as a current resource there, and that's a bit of a cheat sheet as well. So we've got another question here.
Where does rice fit in?
Yeah, rice. Okay, so rice is a plant food, right? So I think it's unprocessed. It provides carbohydrates, which is good. Carbs are not bad. It provides us with energy, especially for growing little bodies. Rice varieties, the different types of rice varieties can vary quite a lot in how they're processed by the body. And I think it fits in when we talk about the healthy plate model. I might even just go back and find it. Sorry, there's lots of extra things added on here. Oh, we just got too many animations. Here we go. So up here, where we go half a plate of veggies, basically quarter plate of meat or protein, and then a quarter plate of carbs. Your rice comes in this quarter plate. It's absolutely fine to include rice in a diet. If your family's happy to eat brown rice, it's a little bit higher in fibre, but white rice is by no means unhealthy. It's just very easy to eat a lot of rice, a bit of meat and no veggies. So just thinking about how we can make that meal a little bit more balanced. Perfect. Need to get a little shortcut how I can go all the way back. Any other questions? Has anything come through from online? No? Okay. Well, for those in person, we'll be here if you want to ask us anything that you didn't feel comfortable asking online. Thank you for everyone attending, both at home and here. We hope it was useful. Again, if you haven't done the survey, could you please do that for us? And thanks again for your time, and don't hesitate to get in contact with the FH nurses if you've got any questions or need any help. Great, thank you.